We now return to the 5th annual FANNIE Awards.
It's day 8 of the 5th annual FANNIE Awards. Thanks for stopping by. We're at day 8, guys. You know what that means? We're in our top 3 movies of the year. This is it. The point of no return. As the Cornelius brothers and Sister Rose would say, it's too late to turn back now. I believe we're in the top 3. I think that's what they say. I don't want to put words in their mouth, though. So let's get right to it. What is my number 3 film of 2019? I think that it's safe to say that at this point, these top 3 movies really are neck and neck. The 3 of them really are neck and neck, and it was just little tiny nudges that edged one over the other, because all 3 of these movies were stupendous in every sense of the word. So I'm just going to go right ahead and tip my cap to movie number 3. I don't even need to say its name out loud because it's pretty much the biggest movie ever made. All I have to say is, Avengers, assemble. If you were some kind of DeLorean driving, time-hopping Marty McFly type character, and you went back to 1993 and you found young Andrew Fantasia and you pulled him aside and you said, hey, listen, kid, one day they are going to make a series of movies that are everything you have ever dreamed of. They are going to be the Marvel universe, and they're all going to be connected, but they're all going to have their own unique flavor. And every once in a while, you're going to get big crossover movies that are going to blow the lids off theaters around the world. Young Andrew Fantasia would wet his pants, not with excitement. He would just wet his pants because that's what he did a lot back then. But then he would wet his pants a second time with excitement and probably give you a hug and say, please take me back with you to this future strange time traveling person. And even as a person who talks about movies and who writes for a living and who acts for a living, it's always been hard for me to articulate into proper words exactly what the MCU means to me and exactly how much of it was swirling around in my own brain as a child. I think the best way to describe it is just, remember action figures? Remember when you used to play with action figures? The thing about action figures is you just kind of, at least with me, you know, we didn't have much money growing up, so you just kind of get whatever action figures you get. You don't have a giant play set full of stuff. You have a random Spider-Man, and you have a random Mr. Freeze goon, and you have a random tiny Bugman with antenna coming out of his head, and you're just like, well, I gotta make a story out of this, so these 3 characters are going to hunt this velociraptor, and go. And you would create these little plastic adventures on the floor of your basement, and they ended up being pretty epic because guess what? Spider-Man just teamed up with Mr. Freeze's goon. That never happens anywhere else. So to take that concept of just childlike delight of getting all your action figures together in your hands and just having a wonderful time watching Jeff Goldblum fight with Earthworm Jim for supremacy, and expand that 100-fold into a multi-million-dollar huge blockbuster event, not once, not twice, but 4 times now successfully. It just blows me away that they have managed to do this, to take this risk, to turn something like the kernel of the idea of the MCU into this full-fledged event that the world has been following since 2008. And when it came time to end the first saga of, we don't even know how many sagas there's going to be, how did they do? We've talked about endings a lot during this year's FANNIE Awards. Like I said, endings are kind of the theme of 2019. And we had a lot of big endings to big things. But endings are hard to do. It is really hard to stick that landing. A lot of things can't land at all. They crash and burn. Look at the last season of Game of Thrones. That really felt like a crash and burn kind of scenario. Star Wars ended. It did manage to land on that tarmac and park the plane and bring it to a complete stop, but I'd be lying if I said that that flight wasn't full of a whole lot of turbulence. It was kind of a messy flight. Endgame had a different way of doing things. The Boeing 747, that is Endgame, not only landed smoothly, it did a graceful loop-the-loop in the air, touched down on its descent, landing perfectly on the runway, going into a quasi Vin Diesel Tokyo Drift kind of move so that when it reached the end of the runway, it was facing the opposite direction, and when it finally rolled to a stop and all was quiet, the pilot turned around in their seat, looked back at the crowd of gasping, wondrous passengers and said with a smile, "You guys want to go again?" That is how good of an ending Avengers Endgame ended up being. And there's a record for the most uses of the word end in a sentence. You're welcome, Guinness. Endgame also had the unenviable task of having to follow Infinity War. And Infinity War was kind of the biggest motion picture event of all time. How do you follow in that movie's footsteps? It seemed like it was destined to be some kind of step down. We don't know how, we don't know where, but it feels like Endgame was doomed to fail before it even started, just because the odds were so against it being as high as we hoped it could be. But then it was as high as we hoped it could be, and then some. While I think if you were to hold a gun to my head and ask me, I would still say I prefer Infinity War over Endgame, you can't overlook the fact that Endgame took all of these characters and all of their storylines and integrated them in a way that wrapped up 10 years worth of storytelling whilst somehow setting up 10 years more. Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely are some of the best writers working in Hollywood right now, and I don't think they get enough credit for that. These people had to plant seeds for so many years for this payoff, and the payoff worked, and it's planting seeds for more down the line to begin with. It's just giving and giving and giving. Avengers Endgame is like Santa Claus, baby. It's just giving us treats all the time, and it looks beautiful too. The MCU changed the game, and Endgame changed the MCU. So it's impossible to overstate just how important it is in the grand scheme of things. And if money is the only language that you speak, then I simply call your attention to Exhibit A. And by A, I mean Avengers Endgame has the highest worldwide box office of all time. There you go, baby. In black and white. So congrats to Avengers Endgame. The biggest movie ever made, my number 3 film of 2019. I hope there are 6 more Avengers movies. I cannot get enough of this wonderful franchise. Now it's time to give out an award that seems like it's diametrically opposite to Avengers Endgame. Because on one hand, we have a movie we just talked about that the whole world clearly saw because it made all the money ever. But now I want to talk about 5 movies that are underrated. 5 movies that don't get love, but deserve love. The nominees for the most underrated film of 2019 are Alita Battle Angel, Midsommar, Missing Link, Ready or Not, Yesterday. Yeah, hopefully this award show gives these movies a little bit of love because they all deserve it. And the FANNIE for the most underrated film goes to Ready or Not. It was a very, very close squeeze between this and Missing Link. And the only reason Missing Link didn't win is because just a few short weeks ago, Missing Link ended up winning a Golden Globe. So clearly it's not as underrated as I thought it was. Ready or Not, however, still barely gets talked about by people, and when it does, it's usually in the negative sense, and I can't understand why this is not as bad a movie as everybody makes it out to be. Yes, it's a splatterfest. Yes, it's cheesy. 98% of its screen time is covered in a thick layer of mozzarella, but that doesn't matter. Cheesy movies can still be great. Splatterfests can still be great. We all sat through 10 Friday the 13th without a fuss, didn't we? Ready or Not played those familiar chords with its tongue planted firmly in its cheek, and because of that, we walked away with a movie that came out of nowhere, shocked us with its sudden appearance, and left us walking away with a big smile on our faces thinking, wow, that was the most fun I've had in a theater in several weeks. And this is at the height of summer, folks. This was a July movie. This had the balls to come out in July alongside all the summer blockbusters, and somehow it still stood out as a fixture of entertainment. That's much easier said than done, especially considering how few big names Ready or Not had behind it to pump up its advertising. It was just coasting on fumes, but those fumes worked. They got me into the theater, and they got me out of the theater smiling and wanting to see Ready or Not again. In a summer filled with some of the biggest blockbuster titans Hollywood had to offer, Ready or Not was the little underdog. It was the little blood-soaked engine that could, and it somehow made a name for itself, even while standing in the shadow of much bigger giants. I would recommend all 5 of the nominees today. I want you to watch all of them because they all have something great to offer. But the one that's been getting the least love by the general public and deserves to be held up a little bit for all to see is definitely Ready or Not. Somebody get this bride a honeymoon already. She deserves it. We got 2 more days left of the FANNIE Awards coming at you. Tomorrow, I will tell you my number 2 movie of the year. Somebody's walking home with a silver medal, and they're going to bite it first to make sure it's real. I never understood why athletes at the Olympics did that. That can't possibly taste good, but whatever. Then tomorrow, we'll also be giving out the award for the most disappointing movie of the year. So bring some clothespins to plug your nose, because that one is going to get a little bit stinky. I'll see you here next time for Day 9. The FANNIE Awards will continue.